So yeah, I mean, some conventions are like there's more flexibility for certain conventions. For example, um, the half year convention, like you can sort of get away with it being sort of like if it actually is in fact very close to it being half a year, and it would just be easier to do that. Um, you could, and this is actually interesting enough. Like the kind of comes back to like tax. Really, it's about tax because depreciation. One of the reasons why um, some companies prefer to use double declining rather than straight line, as well as some of yours, is because there will be more depreciation at the beginning of the lifetime of the life of the asset. So, like, if there is a higher depreciation, um, then you can actually deduct that actually from taxes for corporations. I don't care a lot about that actually. Um, so like they actually might, for example, put assets into service because they were deducted from taxes. I'm not saying that's the reason, but like it would be very helpful to like, especially if like there's like a big increase in revenue because of that asset, to sort of offset that revenue. Um, Having like a lot of depreciation deduction in that first year could be very helpful. And like there's a chance that the asset might be sold even before it gets to the salvage value, actually. Because it's not, or they'll of course just completely dispose of it rather than selling it. I mean, they'll retire the asset, completely salvage it. Maybe there is no salvage value. So like they would rather not have like a asset on their books that is pretty much worthless. Instead, like they would maybe like have it be double declining or some of years for the first 2 years or few years of its useful life, and then get out most of the depreciation, and then pretty much retire that asset because there is no more depreciation expense. Um, the accumulated depreciation has been, you know, most of it's gone. There is no more salvageable value. I mean, there is, but like at this point, it might be smarter to just get rid of the asset, as in like sell it, or just get rid of it. Pretty much sell it. Um, Once that they used it, they used up the asset. I don't know what can you tell you about that. Um, so like it really does come back to the depreciation. So like about taxes. So like because of that, these conventions, like these depreciation conventions, like there's like certain rules. Like for example, the full year of depreciation is a lot harder to use. So like for example, like if it's put into service February 1st, even though it's really close to being a full year, you still have to sort of like go by like the nearest full month. Although you would like to use the full year of depreciation, because that would give you an extra month of depreciation when in fact it's only been put in service 11 months of the year rather than 12. So you would, it's like if you use the full year convention, that will give you an extra month of depreciation. They say you can't do that. But for like the half, but then for the other conventions, like the half year convention, um, like well, pretty much like I'm pretty sure like you can't be like, oh, uh, because half of the year would be January 1st. So, like, for example, if it's March, February, March, April, like May 31st, right? Um, May 31st. Oh, I guess you could use the half year convention if it was put into service on May 31st. But then that would give you like, or not 31st. May 31st. Um, that would be a full 5 months. If you're saying that you would want to appreciate it for another for 6 months, I'll give you an extra month of depreciation. Or no, it would, because if you do it half, if it was placed into service May 31st, it's actually supposed to be 7 months of depreciation, but instead you're saying that it's only going to be 6 months of depreciation. So, like for example, a better question would be like if it was put into service on July 1st. I mean July 1st, obviously. Let's say August 1st. So like there's a test which we use like 40% test for mid-quarter conventions is a trigger. So it's like if it's 40% of the then you'll have to use the quarter convention rather than half of it. It's nice. Mid-quarter convention. Okay, well, those are the policies, but then this isn't really a tax, but like, um, so like, could a question might be like, oh, which convention could you use? You know, like which convention could you use based off of like the IRS tax laws? Okay, that's not really the question here. The question here is not related to like, are you allowed to use this convention? You know, that's something completely different. That's like IRS related that's tax law. Um, so the question isn't really related to like whether or not a convention can be used, but rather um, how a convention would be used. So like, well, you could technically use that half year convention if it's close enough to half a year and it doesn't trigger the 40% test for the mid quarter convention. So like, for example, if it's like October, then clearly it's like you guys sort of see like that's actually more like a quarter of the year rather than half of the year. So like you would have to use the mid quarter convention rather than the half year convention. Um, But outside of the full year, half year, and the mid-quarter conventions, um, there would be those conventions are used to make it easier for calculating depreciation. But it wouldn't give you like an exact number. Like it wouldn't give it like you would have like more of an estimation of the depreciation. Like it wouldn't be but then like if you guys use like these conventions, the numbers would be so similar, like so close to each other. But like sometimes you would want to use a certain type of policy to get the highest level of depreciation expense possible, like to really push the number as high as possible, especially in the beginning of his life. So like, for example, like you would want to use sum of years, or you would want to use double declining to really get the most amount of depreciation at the beginning of the asset's life, as well as when that asset was placed into service. So like to get the highest depreciation possible for the beginning of the asset's life, let's say you would pick double declining or sum of years. And then depending on when the asset was placed into service, you could either pick half year convention, because the full year convention is not going to be, you're not going to really be able to use the full year convention unless it actually is a full year, very close to a full year, like January 2nd. February 1st actually would not allow you to use the full year convention, although I could be wrong. And you could probably not use the half year convention either. Although you would think like, oh, you can use the full year convention, but or you could say like that's the mid quarter convention, but that wouldn't be the mid quarter convention either. So like if it was put into service in February 1st, you would have to use the nearest month, nearest full month convention. So like you would have to calculate the depreciation based off based off of 11 months, unless for example it's really close to a quarter, like a mid quarter. So for example, if it was February 30th, then that would be closer to a mid quarter convention, but not a half year convention. Um, but then like once you get closer to a full year convention, there you have a bit more of like a, you have more slack to say this is a half year, because it's like half a year before the next quarter. For example, like July 1st is closer to half a year than the mid quarter. Um, 40% up to the mid quarter. So the half convention, you guys can use the half convention, um, and there's like a bigger there's a bigger chance of you guys getting away with using half year convention than full year convention. So like it's about how much the IRS is going to say like, oh, you're using the wrong convention to calculate depreciation. Um, you know, there's like these trigger amounts. Like there's a percentage, for example, for um, liability. There's not a convention, but there's a percentage, 71%. If you can calculate the percentage of the liability happening, as well as estimating the cost of the liability, then you would have to actually write that in. But if it's not probable, as in it's less than 71%, as well as not estimatable, and we actually can't calculate that liability, then you would not have. Well, you would have to disclose it, but not write it. Like you would not have to write the liability into the books. So like there's like these percentages that you calculate to see whether or not certain things should be put into place. But besides the half year and the full year and the mid quarter conventions for calculating depreciation, there's just gonna be the nearest full month, which is obvious. How to use the full month, the nearest full month. So like like for example, February, it has only like 28 days of the month, and like some days have like 30 days, some days have 31 days. So like half of the year, half of the month, so it'll be the closest half full month. So if it's like 12, January 12th, it would be, um, or like January, it would be like the full month of January. If it's like January 16th, then it will start from February, so it'll be 11 months rather than 12 months. So like that's getting even closer to getting more of an exact figure of the depreciation. But finally, there's like the nearest fraction of the year, which is like using the calculating it based off of like two, like 3 out of 3, like weeks, pretty much. Like you know, like oh, there's 30 days in the month, so to speak, and like if it's like January 7th, that'll be a third of the month. If it's January 14th, that'll be 2/3 of the month. If it's January 21st, it'll be a full month. So that's like using the fraction